we are, Design Science Association, a beautiful May morning. I'm pleased to be here, and it's nice to see a smiling audience. I think even in an audience like this, there are probably a few people who, in their hearts, would not agree with what is going to be said or with the intent of a group like this, but everyone's welcome, right? Everyone's welcome. The subject I want to talk about today is Darwinism and its toxicity to modern science. I gave a book review here a year or so ago, maybe more, I don't recall, I'm losing track, but, one on the soul of science and one on Stanford's book about genetic entropy. One of those times, I think there was a group of people here at DSA that were involved in meeting with the Oregon Education Standards group in trying to evaluate really what would be the input for standards for science education in Oregon. I think at that time I mentioned there are just a lot of things where we know that evolution has been harmful to the development of modern science. Over the last few years, I'd see something here and I might put on my blog, and pretty soon I collected enough stuff, it kind of became a presentation, and this is the first time I've done it quite with this many pieces attached, so I'll just have to watch the clock and see how it goes. But I think the point here, really the beginning point, is that the business of evolution, we know, it's toxic to people, to cultures, to society, but it's also toxic and has been toxic to the development of good modern science. And I did add a section, to me, the philosophy behind evolution has really led to some difficulties, I would say, in public health as well. And a couple of those things are comfortable for us, and maybe a couple of those things maybe would not be so comfortable for many of us, but we'll go ahead. So my first question, is this man a hero of science, or is he an enemy of science? And maybe an enemy of all social structures? Well, I think people on both sides of the fence would agree that his ideas destroy social structures. But first, a clarification. This is something I wondered about for a long time. I saw mention of Darwinism and neo-Darwinism. I thought, neo-Darwinism, what's that? Well, classical Darwinism, his idea basically was change, but with an unknown cause, plus natural selection. And supposedly, Darwin knew nothing of genetics. I say supposedly because I think there's a lot of suspicion on the part of many people that Darwin really had read Mendel's work on genetics and did not want to acknowledge it. I suppose most of you know Darwin was born in 1809. He published his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859. So last year, 2009, was a great year to glorify Charles Darwin. 200 years from his birth, 150 years from the publication of his book, and he was heralded all over the world in books of science and so on. And it turned out to be a great year. If you wanted to find out something about Darwin, it's a great year just to go online, Google, and find what a lot of the journals like Science and others were saying about it, because they were putting in all the effort to do the research about what he had done, what he had said, and all of these questions you could find in the review articles that were actually published with all the effort of ideologue Darwinists to find out a lot of the stuff about really the questions. What did he really know? I may get to that. Neo-Darwinism, though, this applies to the idea of evolution, but with the understanding that would come later of genetics, and so the machine or the engine of change would be mutations, then followed by natural selection. So it's called neo-Darwinism because Darwinism, or classical Darwinism, Darwin knew nothing of, supposedly, of genetics. Well, I suppose some of you, maybe many of you, have heard of Daniel Dennett. He's a materialist philosopher. He wrote a book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and he says Darwinism acts like a universal acid, dissolving virtually all structures of morality and culture. I think for most of you here, there's really no argument with that. For us, we'd say, yeah, that's right, it's terrible. From Dennett's point of view, he says, no, that's great. He doesn't mind that. He's just observing. This is like in a court of law. The whole question is you find the two opposing sides to find out what's true, and that's the first thing you have to do in a court of law. If both sides agree on something, then the court takes it to be truth. And here's Daniel Dennett, who would be very much in favor of evolution, and a group like, I suppose most of us here, we would be contrary to evolution, but we both agree it's toxic culturally. But then, what about not just to our culture, not just to our moral standards, not just the way we live, but what about to science itself? Dennett wouldn't talk about that, I don't think. But I'm going to offer, when I first did this, I said truncated list. I haven't changed this slide yet because maybe it's a little bit longer now, in which Darwin's dangerous idea has been toxic or at least severely retardant to the advancement of true science. And in this particular presentation, I've added a few areas of public health which I believe have suffered as well. So I call this a short list. It doesn't look very short, but just so we'll know where we're going. In my view, Darwinism, the whole idea, has been retardant or was retardant to the acceptance of germ theory, the work of Louis Pasteur, retardant to the modern antiseptic theory and antiseptic surgery, Joseph Lister. Third, the idea of vestigial organs hindered medical science. The notion of junk DNA, which is very clearly an evolutionary point of view, retarded molecular biology. It has hindered the understanding of embryological development. The whole notion and business of evolution has wasted lives and careers of plant breeders. And if you haven't purchased the book by John Sanford, did I say Stanford or Stanford? Maybe it's back on the book table. Genetic Entropy. I don't know if it's on the table or not. But I really do recommend that you read that book by Sanford. It's a powerful book. Just the introduction is just worth the price of the book itself. And one of the things you find is his own personal testimony. We'll get into that. But so just wasted lives and careers. People would take this idea of evolution and say, okay, we'll use that as our starting point for our science and spend months and years in white lab coats here and there just pouring money down the rat hole and wasting their lives because they began with a wrong-headed idea. Evolutionism has been retardant to the scientific understanding of epigenesis. We'll talk about epigenesis. But epi means outside, like an EpiPen is outside the body. Genesis. So the epigenesis is the idea of the processes that are happening outside of the genes. There's a lot going on there, and it has to do with what used to be called junk DNA, which it's not. One will take a little bit of discussion. A Nobel Laureate spent a lot of dead-end time with perhaps a wrong-headed idea. I would say this one is still a little bit up in the air. There's been some discussion in the literature, and if we have some time to discuss that, we will. This was a new one for me, and maybe some of you read it in the creationist literature recently, within the last couple of years, that Darwinian ideas threatened the North Atlantic cod fishery. Anyone heard that yet? Has anyone read it? I just ran into this the other day, and it was one of the major creation organizations that pointed this out, but I don't recall when it was published. And finally, number 10, in my view, the whole evolution notion undergirds several harmful public health practices. So, I don't know if that's a short list, but here we go. Toxicity, number 1. Darwinism was a retardant to the acceptance of germ theory. And you've heard of Louis Pasteur. Pasteur was a creationist. He believed absolutely in God and in God's creative work. But because of the science climate of his time, his work in identifying microbes as a source of why wines spoil in Italy or whatever it was, he began working with wines first, then later milk. His work was resisted because it seemed to go against the grain of the day of evolution. So the question, how many people unnecessarily suffered because Pasteur's contemporaries, with their minds poisoned by Darwin's idea that life could come from non-life, opposed Pasteur's demonstrations that life could come only from pre-existing life. I remember when I was in school a few years ago, that long before Louis Pasteur was a guy named Reedy, R-E-D-I. Yeah, so many people read this stuff. This is really back in the deep history of my mind, who really realized that when meat spoils, it wasn't just life arising from non-life. There was something going on there. But it seems like by the time Louis Pasteur came along, that lesson had been forgotten in some way. So Pasteur was really opposed, and Pasteur always worked for the benefit of others, not for praise or for financial gain. He remained humble despite many medals and honors. And he said, science brings men closer to God. But really his work was resisted, and so it wasn't really used as immediately as it could have been. And that led to a second thing, and that was the work of Joseph Lister. If you've ever used Listerine, where's the name come from? It comes from Joseph Lister. He was the guy who started modern antiseptic surgery. Why did he do that? Because he had read about Louis Pasteur's work, and he said, maybe that's why when we start cutting the skin on people when we do surgeries, we're losing most people. Or if somebody gets kicked by a horse and the bone is broken, if the skin's not broken, they're likely to survive. If the skin's broken, there's a high likelihood the person will die because of infection. So after Joseph Lister read what Louis Pasteur had published and written, he said, well, maybe we can do that in surgeries. So he began to, I don't have it here, but I think there are some books that have a picture of Lister's operatory. He began using a sprayer. First, he did the antiseptic washing the people who were involved in the surgical procedure, and also sprayed a very mild acid. There are some pictures of someone spraying a very mild carbolic acid into the air to kill germs in the air as well. Well, he was opposed for 2 decades in Britain because, why? The resistance to Pasteur's germ theory. Well, so Lister, he said, okay, he went to Germany. At the time, if you were going to undergo surgery, you should make sure your estate was well in order, because your likelihood of getting home was not very good. Probably on the order of 10 or 15% if you go under the knife at that time. He went to Germany practicing his antiseptic surgery, and his survival rate, you can call success rates, maybe they weren't healed completely, but maybe you could just measure success as not dying from infection. And so from that point of view, the survival rate from his antiseptic surgical procedures went up to about 85% or 90%. Within 10 years or so, the British were begging him to come home. Please come home and take a position as a royal surgeon. So they finally got the clue. Well, the question is, how many people died unnecessarily in Britain because they sent their homeboy over to Germany because they didn't want to listen to Louis Pasteur's very carefully and well done science. That resistance came very specifically from evolutionary point of view, a resistance to the idea of creation. So, conclusion, Darwinism tragically retarded the life-saving benefit of antiseptic surgeries. For a while at least, a decade or two. For sure, some people died that didn't have to die. Now we understand it, but what are the things don't we know today that we could be benefiting from if the scientific community were not primarily beginning with a wrong-headed notion of science by beginning with evolution? Third one, vestigial organs. I hope you read the comics in the Oregonian. I do. If you don't, I think you're culturally deprived, maybe. But this one was only about 2 weeks ago, May 2nd. So the guy winds up, I don't know if this is supposed to be God or St. Peter at the gates or who. He says, you had it removed? Didn't you know that the human soul resides in the appendix? And of course, if he had his appendix out, he was really nervous. Maybe he's not going to get in. And the angel said, oh, relax, dude. He's just messing with you, right? Well, the timing for this was great because I could put it in the slides. This is, did anyone see that? Did you go? Oh, good for you. Does anyone here cut out cartoons every now and then? I cut them out and I scan them, so I have a bunch of cartoons on my computer. So I love it. Don't tell anybody. Okay. Number 3, this is what we're talking about. The idea of vestigial organs resulted in many body parts being unnecessarily removed and hindered the advance of medical science. There are two things there. First, surgeries that aren't needed. What does the word vestigial mean? The word vestige means just some leftover part, something that's left from some other process. It's just kind of left behind, not needed, unnecessary, or it's just a leftover. It's hanging around. It's a relic of some kind. Well, it's well recognized that the whole notion of vestigial organs is a derivative of the idea that an evolutionary history would require, as an organism evolves and changes, there will be some new structures added, and there will be a few that are kind of left behind. They're not functioning, but just, the evolutionary process hasn't quite figured out how to get the thing out of the body yet, so it's just still there, just kind of hanging around. That's the idea of vestigial organs. There's kind of a bunch of scattered, useless remnants as evolution continues its, here's a word, inexorable march to higher and higher life forms. It means it's not going to go backward. We're always getting better. Unless you go to the hospital and the chief professor of evolution has just had a baby and the doctor comes out and says your child is a mutant, and you just kind of wait to see if he expresses joy or concern. So, problem. This business of vestigial organs is not true. Many people had appendices or their tonsils yanked out unnecessarily, and they were victims of false Darwinian ideology. For me, I've had both. One was unnecessary, one was necessary. But when I was young, I was getting pain in my side. As it turned out, I had to have a kidney removed. I was in a small town. They said, "Oh, you have a pain in the right side? No problem. We know what that is." Out goes the appendix. I still remember the ether. It was just nasty stuff. So, well, 1895. There's a guy named Robert Wiedersheim. He listed 180 alleged vestigial or rudimentary organs in 1895. Today, the list is down to a handful. In fact, Dr. Richard Lumsden, who's now passed away. I think he died about 8 or 9 years ago. After he retired, he went on with ICR for a few years before he passed away. He said, we have discovered important biological functions and necessity for every one of them. This is the only place I've seen a statement that strong. Lumsden had very, very strong academic credentials. So I'm not in any position to argue with him. If someone wants to question that, that would be an interesting thing to check into. I'm taking his word for it because he was a very highly published guy when he was working, before he went to work for ICR. So we should ask, what was this, whatever it is, appendix or tonsil or whatever it may be, what was this made for? Since God made the whole body, he had a reason for including every part. That would be the creation point of view. So looking at the graph on the left, beginning in 1895 when Wiedersheim listed his 180 vestigial organs, so on the left side, in 1895, that basically represents the hypothesis or the theory of the evolutionary point of view. Of course, there will be all these relics, these remnants left lying around in your body, and that's what evolution is, what Darwinism and neo-Darwinism would predict. Well, if you read the Bible, you say, well, everything has a purpose. Maybe in a fallen world, we have mutations and things are just kind of getting a little worse as we go along, but we would not expect 180 organs or functions that just are useless now or have no purpose. So by 2008, as we approach zero, it's really approaching what would be the biblical prediction. And that is, God, when he created, he saw it and he says, it's good. In fact, when he finished, it's very good. And so here's a case where the evolutionary hypothesis fails and fails and fails. And the next one I'm going to talk about is junk DNA, so we'll see the other side of this graph here in a minute. So the one more thing, though, why, not only people having unnecessary surgeries, why would medical science suffer? Interesting question, yeah? Well, Steve Haley's kind of nodding his head. Yeah, are you still teaching science, Steve? You're retired, yeah. Well, if you're going to do research, would you prefer to do research, or would you prefer to fund research for something that you think is really useful and functioning? Or are you going to spend money? I guess many people spend public money for things that aren't really, well, never mind. Would you want to do your research on something that's considered useless, a vestigial, something left from some past function that's not working now? No, you're not going to do research that way. You want to do your research on something, you say, oh, this has a purpose, it has a function, let's study this thing. That thing over there, nah, it doesn't seem to be doing anything, so let's not look at it. That's why science suffered. When we get to the DNA, we get to the junk DNA, the human genome study almost suffered from that very idea that you don't study what you don't think has a function. Fortunately, that didn't happen. So, conclusion, due to Darwin's portrayal of Darwinian, not just Darwin, Darwinian portrayal of remnant junk, lots of body parts were unnecessarily yanked out while the increase of scientific knowledge was delayed. It's useless to study useless organs, right? Of course. Neo-Darwinian toxicity number 4. Neo-Darwinism's idea of junk DNA has severely retarded the advance of modern molecular biology. So this whole business of junk DNA, I first heard of this about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and I thought, well, that doesn't sound right. God doesn't make junk. I knew whoever coined that phrase, they were wrong, but I didn't know a whole lot more about it. But in fact, let's see. The idea of junk DNA has now been clearly discredited. Where does the idea come from? Quite simply, again, that evolution has left behind useless remnants. And as maybe this segment of DNA was being used for some function in the past, but the process of evolution has just continually moved ahead to something greater and better. And that piece of DNA, it's not used anymore, it's not needed anymore, it's just sitting there, and the evolutionary process hasn't had time or hasn't worked to eventually throw it out, so it's just still hanging around. It's not being used. Well, why did they kind of have that point of view? 25 years ago, they recognized that only about 10% of DNA was used to express proteins. And proteins are the molecule of structure and function in the body. So the view was, if it makes protein, it's useful. 10%, that's pretty good. 90% useless. That kind of rings a bell if you're a Darwinist ideologue, because that figures. There's 10% working, 90% just. That sounds about right. Okay, and that's the point. The Darwinian notion and the neo-Darwinian notion would really demand. Look at the bottom characters down here, just the bottom sentence. It would demand a genome in which genetic noise rivals or even dwarfs genetic signal. It should just have a lot of junk in there. That in fact, is a prediction. And I need to thank the nice lady at the book table. Here's a plug for the nice lady at the book table, because I happened to be here last week, and she said, oh, we just got this book by Stephen Meyer, Signature in the Cell. So it looks, if you have a hard time sleeping, that's the book for you. As she pointed out, no pictures, and she was right. But I was aware of this whole thing of the junk DNA, and I had one reference, but by the fellow named Ono. So when I read that book, I didn't read all of it. I just glanced through it. The Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. Got a few more references. So indeed, the scientists who first reflected on the discovery of the supposed junk DNA, Susumu Ono. And these are the others I didn't know about until I read that book last month. Richard Dawkins, Francis Crick, Leslie Orgel, W. Ford Doolittle, Carmen Sapienza, all of them assumed that junk DNA was an expected by the product of mutational processes, and that the presence of junk in the genome confirmed that such processes had played a central role in the origin of genetic information. I was aware of Ono, but until I got the book back there on the book table last month, I didn't aware that Dawkins was pushing this same idea, and that also Leslie Orgel and these others as well. So it's clear, the evidence is clear that this was the Darwinian reasoning, and they really did believe there was junk DNA. We don't, because we don't think God makes junk. And I say we, I guess, for most of us here, there may be some here with a different point of view, but That's where I'm coming from. So now the figure on the right, the same thing. 1972, Ono publishes this paper, and he says 90% of the DNA is junk. It's not being used to express proteins, therefore it's useless. So by 2008, they're saying, well, there's just a little bit of the DNA that we don't know what it's used for, but boy, we have been finding a lot of stuff going on, so it's probably all there for something. Well, we knew that because we read the Bible, and that's what God said from the beginning. He said it's very good. If you have time, or if you like to Google stuff, look for micromanagers. You look for little pieces of the RNA that are involved in a lot of the functions in cell regulation. And it looks like that's where a lot of that genetic information is being used. And so maybe we'll talk about some of this. Remember I mentioned that the whole Human Genome Project almost suffered a major blow from this Darwinian notion of junk DNA and say, well, we don't need to study something that's useless. Here's, I got this Professor Chris Ponting from the UK Medical Research Council's Functional Genetics Unit. He told BBC News Online, I don't have the exact date here, but I posted this on my blog a couple years ago, so there's a reference there if you want to go find it. Amazingly, there were calls from some sections to only map the bits of genome that coded for protein. Mapping the rest was thought to be a waste of time. Of course, if you believe in evolution, you would think that, right? Let's not waste the public money. We have other things we can use public money for. It's very lucky that the entire genomes were mapped as this work is showing. He said, I think other bits of junk DNA will turn out not to be junk. I think this is the tip of the iceberg, and that there will be many more similar findings. Well, hello, we're already there. We already knew that. We, being, if you believe the Bible, that God made things with purpose and intent and functioning, and it was a good creation. So Dr. John Maddox says the failure to recognize the full implications of what? Non-protein coding DNA may well go down as one of the biggest mistakes in the history of molecular biology. Why was it a mistake? Because beginning with a wrong-headed notion. Do you see, if you're an educator, and Steve, it's too bad you're retired, go into the public, go teach in the public schools now. we need educators that will teach this as history and say, there's a major failure of the scientific system to really look at the DNA that they weren't looking at because there was a wrong idea. Oh, what was the wrong idea? Tell everybody, tell the kids what the wrong idea was. It was beginning with the wrong-headed notion that evolution happens instead of creation, putting everything there in the first place. So you can find this in Scientific American 2003. So my question is, will that statement appear in our Oregon textbook soon? The failure to recognize the full implications of non-protein coding DNA may well go down as one of the biggest mistakes in the history of molecular biology. Well, it might, but if it appears in the public school textbooks, will it also give the reason why? If it doesn't, it's not only bad education, it's miseducation. And there's some lack of education, but there's also miseducation. It means teaching things in a wrong way. And I would say there would be people guilty if this is not taught and regularly in the public schools within 5 years, if these things are raised in the public schools. So, conclusion, neo-Darwinism has clearly hindered advances in molecular biology and could have even prevented mapping of the full human genome had not wiser heads prevailed. Toxicity number 5. Darwin's idea of embryological development and later Ernst Haeckel's recapitulation theory hindered the understanding of embryological development. If you have been coming here very long or reading those books back on the book table or watching videos very long, you've probably heard the name Ernst Haeckel with a hiss among the crowd here. You know, it's Ernst Haeckel. Okay, because we know what he did. He created a terrible fraud. He forged pictures. Let's see what happened. Here's Haeckel in his not in his younger days, holding looks like a skull in his hand there. So he's maybe most infamous for the totally erroneous recapitulation theory What was that theory? That the human embryo is initially identical with that of other mammals, and it goes through a series of stages where it has gills like a fish, a tail like a monkey, and so on. In other words, if you knew how evolution happened, it goes through these steps, then the embryo, as it develops, goes through the same kinds of steps to finally become a human or a monkey or whatever it may be. So, Haeckel, he must have had one of the most huge egos, maybe in the history of science, I don't know, or history of non-science, I should say. So he called it, he called it the law of recapitulation. He liked to use that word law if it was his idea. The biogenetic law, he also called it. And he created this cute little phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, if you're a book publisher, or if you're a teacher, every now and then there are just a few gems that are so precious you cannot throw them in the dustpan, right? In the dustbin. You have to keep it. I mean, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny sounds so overwhelmingly scientific that it must be right? It's not. So ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Recapitulates means follows the same pattern as, or follows the same sequence. Phylogeny means the development of the phylum. Ontogeny means the development of the embryo until birth. So that's this whole idea. And about 15 years ago, I was helping a student out at OGI practice English, and I asked the student, I heard, let's see, that the last time this was really discussed in the scientific literature was in a journal in 1922. I don't have access to that journal. Could you get me a copy of that? And the student acquired a copy of that, and I have that copy in my file at home somewhere. The 1922 journal article where really this issue is put to bed scientifically. But philosophically, it hasn't been put to bed because people don't want to let go of the idea. It's too nice. It's too cute. It lends itself too easily to education, or should I say miseducation. So what happened? Well, with this, Haeckel manufactured some evidence. In his 1868 book, he wrote a book called The Natural History of Creation. That's not the English title. That's actually a translation from the German title. And he fraudulently changed embryo drawings. And maybe if you're out there hissing, then you already know about his drawings. Of a dog embryo and a human embryo, the drawings had been published by two other scientists. And so he changed those. He was fraudulent. He forged his own pictures. And about 6 years later, Professor Wilhelm His showed Haeckel's forgeries. Number one, he added 3.5 millimeters to the head of the dog embryo, took 2 millimeters off the head of the human embryo, doubled the length of the human posterior, substantially altered the details of the human eye. Well, Haeckel was raked over the coals by his contemporaries, but he kind of went with it like this. Well, please forgive me, but since we know it's truth, I was just looking for some way to demonstrate scientific truth. And on it went. It just took on a life of its own. That's the way it went. Okay? But in fact, it was not truth. Here are the original drawings of a dog embryo and a human embryo, and then as he doctored them up in the lower picture, that's the way he doctored them up to make them look similar. It was a fraud. That's not his only fraud. This reference down at the bottom, creation.com, if you go to creation.com and look up about Haeckel, evangelist for evolution, apostle of deceit, you'll find a lot of information. That's where I pulled this out. So Darwin's idea of embryological development still survived, and was later polished and refined with Haeckel's catchy phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So, even though it's known, number one, embryonic recapitulation theory has a totally dishonest basis. Number two, recapitulation theory was discredited scientifically long ago. I mentioned the 1922 paper. I'm not aware of any since then, except for a review paper that have really questioned it technically. Nevertheless, the completely false idea that human beings retrace their evolutionary past in the womb has been taught as evidence for evolution in schools and universities until very recently, and it's still included in many popular science books. Down at the bottom I said, for example, Raymond Hockey's Evolution, published in 1986. There's a picture of the book I took off, what's the thing you do online, you want to get books? You know? Yeah, one of those, Amazon.com. So I snagged the picture. I looked to see if I could get a picture of the back cover, but what this site says the front cover says, produced in collaboration with the British Museum of Natural History. When was this? 1986? Let's see, I shouldn't do math in front of a big group of people. I think that's 64 years after the whole thing was settled, technically. 64 years, and here's a book being published, high level, and they're still saying the same thing. What's it say on the back cover? Like many other animals, human beings retrace much of their evolutionary past in the womb. By the time the human fetus, excuse the British spelling, is 28 days old, it resembles our earliest vertebrate ancestor, the fish. Like a fish, it has what appears to be 4 gill slits. And on it goes. So it has taken on a life of its own, not because of scientific integrity, but because of a religious will of people to reject God and find any way they can to run away from God. And at the same time, they must run away from true, careful, observational science and scientific integrity. But there are more implications. Today, some abortionists convince young girls, you can have an abortion, it's okay. The fetus right now it's still in its fish stage, so it's just like cutting up a fish. Don't think that happens? Probably you could get online or you could look around and you would find instances within a few minutes of information where that has been done within not only our lifetimes, maybe within the last 10 or 20 years. Henry Morris, the late Henry Morris, wrote this: we can justifiably charge this evolutionary nonsense of recapitulation with responsibility for the slaughter of millions of helpless prenatal children. Prenatal means they haven't been born yet, and they weren't going to be, or at least for giving it a pseudo-scientific rationale. The book, do you have The Long War Against God on the book table back there? One copy? Don't have it? But if you, she has it. From my point of view, that book is, I think, the greatest book for anyone to read if you want to deal with the question of evolution and science. Because one book like Gish's book might deal with fossils, or someone else might deal with anthropology, someone else might deal with, I don't know, physics. But Morris really backs up and he looks at the question like if you're in a war, you have some people fighting over here, and there's a battle over here, and there's a battle over here, and you get some commanders that are kind of looking over the whole thing. And back in the command bunker, you see the whole picture that's going on. And Morris really has written that book from the perspective of a spiritual battle. So he has a lot of the details in there of the scientific aspects, but he really has a very clear-eyed view of the spiritual battle as well, including maybe some of the inspiration for Darwin writing his book, The Origin of Species. Maybe we'll take time for a break now. Is that okay? So. I'm sorry? Oh, lots of copies of The Long War Against God. If you don't have it, buy it, read it, share it with someone else. Okay?
You know, I got to take out an appendix once.
Was it needed?
Surgeon removed it from the patient, put it in a basin, and said, "Swenson, take it out." And I did. I took it out of the room, and that's the closest I got. But it was not unusual in doing surgery if the surgeon would do the gallbladder procedure or the whatever procedure, and then as an add-on, they would remove the appendix because it was not needed. Often that was a medical student's procedure.
Yeah.
So, a training exercise. You don't need it.
Okay, yeah. Am I on? I'm on. Okay, all right. Well, when I had my appendix removed unnecessarily, it was in a small railroad town in the mountains of California, and I had friends overheard the doctor discussing whether they should keep me there another day to make sure the hospital got that much more money from the railroad insurance. Well, things happen. What's next? Okay, so continuing, I didn't quite finish the subject on the recapitulation, but so I want to quote what was said by Sir Gavin de Beer. He was one of the last century's probably premier embryologists. He got the Sir on his name because of his very excellent work. He said this: the recapitulation theory was a mental straitjacket that has thwarted and delayed embryological research. So you don't need to take that from me. I'm not a Sir, but he was. He was a Sir, and that's what he said. So if you want to argue with him, you probably can't argue with him now because I think he's no longer with us. But he had the credentials to say this, and he said it. So you can find that quote and read more about the continuing persistent propagation of this downright wrong idea in high school and university textbooks in Jonathan Wells' book, Icons of Evolution. And that's probably also back on the book table, I suppose. Conclusion, this is basically what Sir Gavin de Beer said. Haeckel's recapitulation theory, taken directly from Darwin's ideas on the subject, has thwarted and delayed embryological research. Neo-Darwinian toxicity number 6. Decades of research and countless researchers' lives were wasted pursuing neo-Darwinian ideas of improvement through mutations. I think if you were here when I gave the book review on John Sanford's book, Genomic Entropy, I covered this somewhat, and maybe some of the things, maybe some of the pictures here you have seen before if you were here then. So the point is the neo-Darwinian notion of ascendancy of life forms by mutation and natural selection led to a lot of wasted lives, a lot of wasted money in dead-end plant breeding experiments. So this I've taken basically from John Sanford's book. So there's Dr. Sanford. Maybe he's even younger looking than that now, I don't know. He was a Cornell University plant breeder, a career plant breeder and geneticist, and he was a co-inventor of the gene gun, which is, it's not a gun, but it's a device that's used to produce genetically modified foods and other things. And this is his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, published about 3 years ago. What do I want to say about that? Maybe some of you heard, this business with the genetically modified foods. This is not in the script, but you probably heard of the French people rioting in France about 6 or 8 years ago at the McDonald's because McDonald's was using genetically modified potatoes, and so they were trashing McDonald's all over France. They were rather upset. But there was other news also. Maybe you heard. The monarch butterfly, they have these beautiful, beautiful things everyone admires so much. Well, Cornell University had an experimental plot, and I may not even be able to think of the name of what it is, BT corn. Okay, so BT means Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a particular bacillus, and it has a little segment of its genome that will express something that's a pesticide. So these very smart plant geneticists found this bug, and they peeled out this little piece of DNA from the Bacillus thuringiensis, if I pronounce it correctly. I'm not a biologist, and spliced it into the DNA for the corn, and voila, look how that works. You don't have to spray the corn, the corn just generates its own bug killer. So it works great. Kind of, unless you're concerned about cross-mixing of that artificial DNA with something else nearby. Well, it seemed everything was very rosy at the Cornell experimental plot until the season came for the monarch butterflies to come flying through. And suddenly, around the edge of the Bacillus thuringiensis, or the BT corn plot, all of these dead monarch butterflies lying around the field of the august Cornell University's experimental farm. That's not good for public relations if you want to do modified foods and stuff like that. I called John Sanford about 3 years ago. I said, was that your corn? He says, no, but that was my gene gun that made the corn. So, okay, here we go. So this is what he says. Because beneficial mutations are so central to the primary axiom, and that's what he basically deals with in his book, Genetic Entropy, the primary axiom being that mutation combined with selection have created all biological information. During the last century, there's a great deal of effort invested in trying to use mutation to generate useful variation. So, this was especially true, he says, in my own area of plant breeding, when it was discovered that certain forms of radiation, certain chemicals were powerful mutagenic agents, then millions and millions of plants were mutagenized. So use a chemical mutagen, use a radiological mutagen to try and get mutations, and then they were screened for possible improvements. Why? That's a no-brainer if you believe evolution. Because look how wonderful it has become without intelligence. If we can add intelligence, just think how we can feed the world twice over. We don't need population control. We can throw out the pill, and China can have more than one child per family. This is great. Well, but China didn't have one-child policy at this time when they were doing this. This was in the first maybe 3 decades of the 20th century. So assuming the primary axiom, it would seem obvious that this would result in rapid evolution of our crops. So for several decades, this was the main thrust of crop improvement research. So they produced vast number of mutants, chemical mutagens, radiological mutagens. They produced them, they screened them, see what, we're going to find something better. We will surely find something better because of chance processes have brought us to this wonderful condition we have now. Just think how much greater it's going to be, how wonderful. What was the result? A huge number of small, sterile, sick, deformed, aberrant plants were produced. However, from all this effort, almost no meaningful crop improvement resulted. The effort was, for the most part, an enormous failure and was almost entirely abandoned. Would this crowd have known it was going there anyway, in this room? Yeah, we knew where it was going, but they didn't ask us, I don't think. They asked Mr. Darwin and his successors. Why did this huge mutation selection experiment fail, even with a host of PhD scientists trying to help it along? Because even with those billions of mutations, there were no significant new beneficial mutations arising. You find this in the book, you buy the book. Conclusion, decades of researcher lives were wasted, money lost. Who knows how many people did not have enough to eat because the money being poured into research was going into the wrong thing. They were beginning with the wrong-headed Darwinian prediction of improvement by mutations, when maybe they could have been feeding a lot more people if they started with a different beginning point. Maybe someone can help me. The fellow who was the primary mover for the Green Revolution, plant geneticist, does someone recall the name? He actually wasn't a geneticist. He was a plant breeder. Did a lot of his work in Mexico. He died about 2 years ago, I think, maybe a year and a half ago. So that's really what happened. This is not in the script either, but after all these failed things, all the PhDs, here was this guy down, an American fellow, I believe, down in Mexico, working with plants with 2 ideas. Basically, you do a lot of screening, find the better ones, and also a lot of mechanical fertilization. And he really started what was called the Green Revolution. It resulted in doubling the food production in the world. If you Google it, just look for Green Revolution, you'll find his name. I'm sorry, I can't remember it now. But he was probably one of the most significant figures of the 20th century because of millions and millions of people who had food to eat, who maybe would have even died of starvation. But he wasn't doing all these chemical mutagens and radiological mutagens and screening these sick, aberrant plants. He was out there with his hands in the dirt, in the plants in the field, finding something that was really working. I'm not anti-science. Okay, I have a PhD, but all I'm saying is you have to start, when you do science, you have to make sure you start with the right idea. If you start with the wrong idea, you're just going to waste your life and someone else's money. Okay, neo-Darwinian toxicity number 7. Neo-Darwinism has been and continues to be retardant to the scientific understanding of epigenesis. I mentioned this early on, so maybe someplace I mentioned down here, epigenesis. Epi means outside, genesis means the genes, so there are processes going on outside of the genes. And the question is, what's going on there? Why wasn't a lot of this really understood earlier? Here's what I have to say, and a lot of this is from Wells' book, Icons of Evolution. If you don't have the book, if you have not read it, I do recommend it. It really nails several subjects very clearly and very well. The presence of identical genes in radically different cells, a phenomenon known as genomic equivalence, is a paradox. If genes control development and the genes in every cell are the same, why are cells so different? So here you have a question, you have a cell and it has this DNA, but it goes through cell differentiation. And you start dividing, and some then wind up as muscle in your hands, some as maybe something in your eye or brain cells or something in your lung, your heart. It goes to many different places, but the DNA is still the same. So why do you get different function and different structures when you have the same DNA? Well, that was a question begging for an answer even 60 or 70 years ago. 60 or 70 years ago. But what happened was the whole idea of epigenesis, things happening outside the genes were so attractive to the neo-Darwinists. They had like a fatal attraction, a fixation on that only because they had developed this idea of neo-Darwinism and what they call the synthetic theory, the synthesis of Darwin's idea and genetics. That's where all the research money was poured, and so the investigation of what was happening outside the genes, that got lost in the shuffle. It fell by the wayside. So that's a fuzzy picture of Dolly. I won't tell you which. Both of the Dolly pictures are fuzzy. One's woolly and one's fuzzy. But cloning Dolly. So when the sheep they called Dolly was cloned, one mammary gland contained the DNA for the cloned offspring cells, creating the Dolly, and Dolly survived. So it was very clear proof that already fully differentiated cells from the mammary gland of the sheep had all the DNA to produce all the other structures, the bone, the brain, the eyes, and everything. So that work in Scotland, I guess it was 15 years ago, was really a very important thing. But the question, why? Well, it seems that genes are being turned on and off by factors outside of themselves, that is, epigenetic, beyond the genes. So if you read Wells's book, he points out that the neo-Darwinian synthesis of genetics was becoming increasingly popular, and so biologists searching for epigenetic factors were suppressed. If you wanted, during that time when the neo-Darwinian synthesis business was really being put together, if you wanted funding to do work in epigenesis, it wasn't the hot topic of the day. We want to work on the neo-Darwinian synthesis theory. Epigenesis, get out of here. We're busy with something that's more important. But it's really important. And now you understand there's something happening that makes all those cells do different things with the same DNA. And that's really beginning to be really appreciated only maybe in the last 10 years, more fully, as they realize that junk DNA is not junk. A lot of the information that's in what was being called junk DNA is what is driving those functions in epigenesis. So Wells is an intelligent design person, at least. I don't recall being specifically creation. I guess he is. But he quotes a historian, a science historian, John Sapp. So Sapp said that epigenesis researchers seem to threaten the significance of the merger of Mendelian genetics and selection theory. So it had to be denied. It was just it was the wrong argument at the wrong time. It couldn't get the money. So Wells calls this the rise of the neo-Darwinian monopoly in genetics. Today it's understood. This epigenesis business is really, really critical. It's the really hot new area of research, but it was suppressed because of the Darwinian idea, the demand that it be synthesized with genetics, and it became a monopoly on money, on funding, on the intellectual pursuits in universities and institutes, and there you go. Did science suffer? You bet science suffered. Did you know this? Has anyone told you? Has anyone told your children that science suffered this way because of a wrong-headed idea? Anybody here heard this before? You didn't buy the book. You should have bought Wells' book. You'd know this. Okay, conclusion. Neo-Darwinism has been and continues to be retardant to scientific understanding of epigenesis. Number 8. This one I'm a little hazy on, but we'll just go after it, okay? Even a Nobel Laureate admits spending a lot of dead-end time pursuing neo-Darwinian ideas. I first picked up on this from a creationist publication. I thought that was very interesting. And so I heard that this Nobel Laureate, Werner Abel, had said, we have in vain spent much time, well, in trying to do what? In trying to follow through on the Darwinian implications of his very good scientific work for which he received or shared a Nobel Prize. So in this modern generation, since Google is a verb, I Googled, we have in vain spent much time, and it popped right up, just like that. It was in Abel's Nobel address, and that's what he said. What happens? What's it about? If you've read much of anything about modern genetics and genetic engineering or genetically modified foods or whatever, you have most likely heard mention of restriction enzymes. How many of you have heard of restriction enzymes? He just graduated from, he's a teacher. Somebody else just graduated from PSU with a degree. So, yeah, okay. Few people know restriction enzymes. What are they? Well, first, if you are a professional researcher in the field, you're likely shaking these little guys into your lab soup every day if you're in molecular biology. Why? What do? They are to genetics what cut and paste software is to word processing. In word processing, you can cut a piece here, paste there, right? Control X, Control V, and it's done. Well, this cut and paste business has been going on a long time, actually since creation in all living things, but God didn't happen to call it that we know of. So these restriction enzymes, they're the genius little chemical machines that snip and clip and toss and insert segments of DNA to get recombinant sequences. So it takes a piece here and makes something else. They were doing this long, long before man got involved in biochemical research. Well, here comes, in 1978, microbiologist Werner Arber was a co-recipient, did I say Abel? It's Arber. A co-recipient of a Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovery of restriction enzymes. The discovery wasn't made in 1978. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1978, but also awarded for their application to molecular genetics. So it began a new era of molecular biology, but also led to a frenzied excitement in the evolutionary theory community. Can you guess why? Here's like cut and paste software. Here's these little chemical things. They'll cut here, they'll cut a piece, they'll put it there. If you want to just really discover why evolution can really happen and to show it, this should just wake you up. I mean, it's like a Jolt Cola twice over. Okay? Well, why? Well, before I explain it, I just have to do the hillbilly song, okay? Now, this is for some old timers. How many of you have heard of Homer and Jethro? Raise your hands if you've heard of Homer and Jethro, okay? Okay, yeah, a lot of gray hairs around here. Anyone under 20 has heard of, anyone here that's under 20 that's heard of Homer and Jethro? Okay, all right, my man, okay. Well, one song, I didn't look it up, but this is my recollection of the song. I sang it with a friend of mine about 40 years ago. So it goes like this. I'll try not to sing except for a couple lines. As I went walking down the street, a billboard caught my eye. The advertisements written there would make you laugh and cry. The signs were torn and scattered from the storm the night before, and as I read the things they said, well, this is what I saw. Smoke Coca-Cola cigarettes, chew Wrigley's spearmint beer. Kettle Rations dog food keeps your wife's complexion clear. Chocolate-covered mothballs, they always satisfy. Brush your teeth with Lifebuoy soap and watch the suds go by. So it's a song. There had been a big storm the night before, and so it peeled off big pieces of a signboard here and stuck it on the one over there. Well, maybe Homer and Jethro should have shared the Nobel Prize with Werner Arber. Well, the idea that got them all excited was to look for a mechanism that will not merely change DNA one base pair or one letter at a time. It's look for something that will change make very large significant changes at a time. So, instead of getting a mutation in that little piece of the DNA that expresses a protein, maybe you can get a mutation in what expresses this restriction enzyme. It's like putting a bug into your word processing software. You think you're going to copy and paste, but it goes to the wrong place. And all of a sudden, if this works, you have a mechanism that can produce very large, significant changes in the genome, because that's what restriction enzymes do. If they go awry, they can generate a lot of change in a hurry. So that's why they were all very excited about it. So it would be like a piece of billboard sign with a large message portion getting mixed up with something else. So in the same way, you can make much more radical errors or mutations in a document by a misplaced copy and paste instead of by occasional mere typing errors. So there seemed to be a potential to produce radically new life forms by mutations on restriction enzymes that decide where to cut and where to paste or to place the segments of the DNA. Werner Arber and his colleagues did a lot of wonderful scientific work in identifying the restriction enzymes and their function. But this is the article that I saw in a Creation publication. Jerry Bergman, probably most of you have seen one or many articles written by Jerry Bergman, very bright guy and very widely read. He gives some insight in how part of Arber's life was wasted and considerably unpublished as he pursued his work from a neo-Darwinian slant. There's a reference to this in ICR.org. So Bergman says this: Arber conducted extensive scientific research in genetics, evolution, and related areas. In his Nobel Prize autobiography, Arber described his research as long but fruitless attempts to document macroevolution with experimental evidence. For this reason, he wrote that much of his work in this area remains largely unpublished. In other words, for the first part of his career, he did great work. Discovered the function, the existence, how they work, the restriction enzymes. For the rest of his career, he said, oh, wow, look at the potential, so we're going to figure out how they drove evolution. The rest of his career was wasted. He says, it's that line I Googled. We have in vain spent much time. Go Google it yourself. We have in vain spent much time. It'll come right up. You can see it. Here's what he said. One could expect that mutations, this is in his Nobel address, okay? One could expect that mutations affecting the part of the enzymes responsible for recognition of the specificity site, the technical language, okay, on the DNA might result in new members of the family recognizing new specificity sites on DNA. Specificity sites means when you cut, you paste, specifically does it go there, or specifically does it go there, okay? We have in vain spent much time in search for such evolutionary changes, both after mutagenization and after recombination between two members of the same family. What he said, we spent a lot of time after our research and we didn't find it. It wasn't there. So, by the way, Arber is a believer in God, but he's an advocate of intelligent creation. So he kind of summarized his lifetime research in another place. Although biologist, I must confess I do not understand how life came about. I consider that life only starts at the level of a functional cell. At the most primitive cells, the most primitive cells may require at least several hundred different specific biological macromolecules. So how such already quite complex structures may have come together remains a mystery to me. The possibility of the existence of a creator, of God, represents to me a satisfactory solution to this problem. So Arber was a guy who believed in intelligent design. He believed in God, at least as a possibility. But I don't think he was a Henry Morris. If he had been a Henry Morris, he would have been bold to say, I know how this stuff came to be, so I want to start with a different beginning point that's consistent with Scripture. Now, I'm not a molecular biologist. I'm not a biochemist. And maybe that's the way God did it, in fact. Maybe that's the way God did it. I'm not going to stand here, especially as a non-molecular biologist, and say, God didn't do it that way. He could have. He could have said, okay, I'm going to change this restriction enzyme. This time it's going to do this. It's going to be a mouse. I'm going to change it this way, and it's going to be an elephant. Of course he could. There was some kind of process in which God created. But to happen randomly by chance, that's another thing. And I think just the effort that has been poured into this kind of stuff has come up fruitless, shows it doesn't happen by random chance. If you're smart enough to do it, if you're smart enough to know what God knows, then you can make those restriction enzymes just dance a very beautiful dance. But if you don't, you're stepping on feet, like my wife accuses me of doing. Conclusion. A Nobel Laureate, after sharing in one of the most important discoveries of molecular biology, spent much of the remainder of his career pursuing fruitless research which was motivated by neo-Darwinian notions of life ascendancy by mutations and selection. Let me issue a caution here. I don't think this story is finished yet. Again, I'm not a molecular biologist, I'm not a biochemist, but in fact, there may be some things discovered here that there could be significant changes. And if someone does find out, if you can iterate this restriction enzyme to do this and get a mouse and get an elephant, does that mean then that could happen by chance? Or does it really show more, on the other hand, that if it took a whole bunch of PhDs, a lot of decades to discover this, then does that demand that we say, oh, then it must have happened by accident in the first place? No, it doesn't. Obviously not if you're a thinking person. It says it took intelligence to track this down. As many of the original founders of science, they said we are seeking to think God's thoughts after him. So if this restriction enzyme business turns out to be the key, it's okay. Are we threatened? No, we say, hallelujah, we know a little bit more about God's creation. That's what science is all about to us. So may I issue that little caution there? It's not a time for rock throwing. It's just a caution to say, begin at the right point. Okay, so let's go on. Darwinian toxicity number 9. Darwinian ideas nearly ruined the North Atlantic cod fishery, thanks to Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley. There should be a couple of names. You guys need to get with it. Now, let's see. Am I right that Jewish families regularly each year, if you're maybe a traditional Jewish family, you read the story of Queen Esther, okay? And when the story is read, anytime the name Haman is mentioned, what happens? Haman. And then Esther did this, and then Haman. Yeah, okay. So, at least in our hearts, when we hear Thomas Henry Huxley, I think. When I hear Ernst Haeckel, I think. Because, well, let's go and just look at this example. I think you'll find it enjoyable. The Darwinian dogma of survival of the most fit nearly obliterated the North Atlantic cod fishery, since it was claimed that fish that get caught are less fit to survive and propagate. The dumb fish get caught and the smart fish don't. So I think maybe if they followed that through to the logical conclusion, then the fish that would evolve would be much smaller fish because they can get through the net. So you'd evolve fish that are too small to eat, maybe. I don't know. So thanks to ICR for bringing this out in the open. It was in ICR's, it was posted May 2009. There's the title, Cod Still Recovering from Darwin Bulldog's Bite. Who was Darwin's bulldog? Thomas Henry Huxley. Right? Thank you. You guys are getting with the program. This is good. Okay. During the late 19th century, codfish numbers in the North Atlantic Ocean drastically dwindled due to overfishing. Fishermen were forced to travel farther for fewer fish. They sought counsel from a British Royal Commission on Trawling. And if you don't know the word trawling, it means hauling nets to catch fish out in the ocean. Okay? Well, and I went, Google's a verb, right? So I went, codfish catch, historical Noah's National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. So I found this plot. Shows 1890 to 1910. Look at those catches dropping. This is only in Maine, but the whole North Atlantic fishery was threatened, not just off the northeast coast of the U.S. You see that precipitous drop from 1890 to 1910. Well, it turns out that Thomas Henry Huxley, thank you, known as Darwin's bulldog, was a leading member of the Royal Commission. Okay? Huxley advised the fishermen to continue fishing without restraint, calling their complaints unscientific. He reasoned that only the weak cod would get caught, and the stronger ones left in the ocean would continue to evolve because of their struggle to survive. Is that in your history books? Young people in public schools or even in Christian schools, have you heard this? Anybody ever tell you this? Adults here, have you heard this story, unless you read it with ICR in 2009? Is this a riot? This is a riot. That's all I can say. But we're not supposed to laugh at that, I guess. So Mark Kalansky, also an evolutionist, wrote in 2006, "The lesson gleaned from Charles Darwin, especially as interpreted by the tremendously influential British scientific philosopher Thomas Henry Huxley," thank you, yes, was that nature was a marvelous and determined force that held the inevitable solutions to all of life's problems. So Huxley's scientific philosophy made sense to himself and his followers, but it did not match the reality of ecosystem, population, and organism dynamics. That's kind of an academic way he says it didn't work. Okay? And Kalansky says that the commission also established the tradition in government of ignoring the observations of fishermen. We probably have some Oregon fishermen who would just love this. Okay. After all, why rely on observations when science has already supplied the answers? If you have read the book Soul of Science by Nancy Pearcey and her co-author, Pearcey and Thaxton was, you would read about why didn't the Greeks, with all their bright minds and all learned people, why didn't they develop modern science? The great shortcoming of the Greek philosophers was that touching the real world was beneath their dignity. They put their own minds at the forefront, arrogantly viewing their dreamed up views of nature as reality. And they left the common work to people, and it was beneath their dignity to touch the real world and do real work. That's why they sat around the Areopagus and places like that, just sharing ideas, as Paul found when he visited Athens. Problem was that their observation of nature was deemed secondary to their own musings. That's why they never had science develop in ancient Greece, and it's the same thing happened with this fisheries business. Ignored what the fishermen saw, and said, and so the science establishment, specifically Thomas Henry Huxley, thank you, yeah, and his wrong ideas nearly ruined the fishery. Okay. Cod still have not fully recovered, and today's problem would likely be much less if a century ago the fishing industry was not encouraged to overfish based on Huxley's evolutionary philosophy. Thank you. A biblical ideology, in contrast, involves respect and care for all creatures as creations of God. According to the Bible, mankind is accountable to understand and properly manage the resources that God has provided. Okay, number 10, and so this is the last one, but it has 3 parts, okay? And this one takes a little bit of a stretch because you would have to go with me or just indulge me a little bit to say there's some philosophy going on here that undergirds some approach to public health today, okay? So I would say a number of harmful public health practices can look back to Darwin's poisonous idea that man is the highest intelligence and that encourages man to ignore God's very good creation. In other words, if everything that we have here has come by chance, wow, when we apply our intelligence, just think how much better it's going to get. And if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in an intelligent, creative God, then that's going to be your conclusion. Let's go for it. Let's mutagenize everything and get the best stuff, and boy, we'll just have a brave new world. I'll mention the lack of breastfeeding and harmful abortion and oral contraceptives. So here's the idea, what I've just said. The evolution worldview, just think, if chance processes have brought us to here, think how much we can improve things with our now superior intelligence. So If chance processes take us from the monkey to the man, then we add our intelligence, we go from the man to the Superman. It's a logical step if you begin without God. It's bingo, bango, bongo. 1, 2, 3. Straight logic. But the Bible says, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So, public health toxicity number 1, not enough of this. Breastfeeding, okay? So if you can read the small print, the lady on the left, she's an entrepreneur, but she's feeding a future business entrepreneur who's getting an important order filled. The lady on the right, apparently she's working on the internet, and so there's a future internet whiz kid busy downloading, okay? So these are ads for breastfeeding put together by associations of people who say, hey, breastfeeding is good. Yeah? Well, here is public health toxicity number 1. Too much formula, reduced breastfeeding increases health problems. And maybe some of you know about this, maybe some of you know about it very well. So here's the idea. We have a lot of PhD chemists making that baby formula. It's got to be good. No problem. Well, here's one from Pediatrics, April 2010. So this is 1 month and 5 days ago. I picked this up on Yahoo. It was an AP article. The lives of nearly 900 babies would be saved each year, along with billions of dollars, if 90% of U.S. women breastfed their babies in the first 6 months of life. A cost analysis says. Well, okay, cost analysis. From our point of view, when I say our, I suppose the way most of us in this room would take it would be we should start not with a cost analysis, but with a life analysis first. But that's okay. So the cost analysis, they still got some information here. There are hundreds of deaths and many more costly illnesses each year from health problems that breastfeeding may help prevent. These include stomach viruses, ear infections, asthma, juvenile diabetes. Anyone heard that one? There may be instances of increased possibility of juvenile diabetes with infants that are not breastfed. A lot of information. Sudden infant death syndrome and even childhood leukemia. When I saw that list a few weeks ago, I thought, man, that is really a list. It is really a list. And for all of us, we should be watching this stuff, okay? The magnitude of health benefits linked to breastfeeding is vastly underappreciated. Breastfeeding is sometimes considered a lifestyle choice, but this lady, Dr. Melissa Bartik, an internist and instructor at Harvard Medical School, says it's more than that. It's a public health issue. Among the benefits, breast milk contains antibodies that help babies fight infections. It can affect insulin levels in the blood, which may help breastfed babies less likely to develop diabetes and obesity. And here's what Ruth Lawrence says, American Academy of Pediatrics. She's the head of the breastfeeding section. The healthcare system has got to be aware that breastfeeding makes a profound difference. A lot of folks know that, but a lot of folks don't. A lot of folks don't. Toxicity number 2. Increased breast cancer and cervical cancer in women due to oral contraceptives and induced abortions. So here's our little philosopher says, oh, the fetus, oh, it's not a baby, it's just an inconvenient blob of tissue. No sweat. Kind of like we found earlier with the recapitulation idea that the embryo is kind of like fish tissue somewhere along the line. It's just a blob of tissue. So celebrate breast cancer awareness, yes. But don't mention the A word. What's the A word? Abortion. What's happened here? How many of you have heard of the abortion breast cancer link? Probably at least maybe close to half in this audience. It's been well known for 20 years. Has it been embraced by the scientific and the public health community? Yes or no? No, that's correct. Should it be? Yes, correct. The 2009 DOLL study, DOLL, this is the lead author, represents the NCI, U.S. National Cancer Institute, acknowledgement of a previously denied ABC link. So here's the article. There's a very important point here, because look at the names. Here are the authors. J. Dahl, J. Dalling, that's Janet Dalling, who's up at the Hutchinson Cancer Institute in Seattle. L. Brinton, that's Louise Brinton, she is with the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C., and some others. This was published in 2009, I don't see the month. So the investigation was for triple-negative breast cancer in women under age 45. Triple-negative breast cancer, 15% of the cases, 25% of the deaths, because triple-negative means you're lacking 3 different receptors that are necessary actually to make chemical treatment against the cancer effective. None of those were there. So, well, over the last decade, the National Cancer Institute, NCI, has gained a reputation for putting politics over science. And that's what some of you said when you said yes and no. You knew this, okay? Did everything possible to deny dissenting opinion during a meeting to establish whether or not a link exists between abortion and breast cancer. This drove me nuts about 15 years ago. I suppose in this crowd, some of you probably get Oregon Right to Life publications, some of you get National Right to Life publications, and you see other stuff like this that maybe you're not going to see in the Oregonian or wherever. And I was discussing with a lot of friends who were at OHSU, visiting scholars from China. And I mentioned this breast cancer link. One dear friend, she's been back in China now for 12 or 13 years, ready to retire, very responsible in her hospital, in her research institute. She said, no, there's no breast cancer link. We know all about that. But the studies had already been done. They were there. They were suppressed, and we know that. But why doesn't the public know that? Why doesn't the general public know that? Now, the main NCI activist, NCI meaning the National Cancer Institute, Dr. Louise Brinton, who got the agency to deny the abortion breast cancer link, has co-authored a study, this is a 2009 study, so this is just last year, that admits the abortion breast cancer link is true, calling it a known risk factor. This is new, coming from NCI. I went to the NCI website. I think I was looking for the breast cancer abortion link to be recognized. Also went to the American Cancer Society, and what's this group that has the run, you know. Yeah, you couldn't find it. You couldn't find it. So you can't read the fine print here, but here, first look at the big print across the top. 1994, the Darling study, 3 high-risk groups. 2003, the NCI panel, NCI meaning the National Cancer Institute. There's no ABC link, they said. April 2009 in Turkey. April 2009, the DOLL study, we find where this was actually recognized. July 2009, Planned Parenthood and the Susan G. Komen for the Cure. Still, nope, we don't see any relationship there yet. We don't recognize it. September 2009, a study in China. Now let's go back and look at these. Let's look at this one first, okay? The 1994 study. Women under 18 or over 29 who obtained induced abortions have more than a 2-fold increase in risk of what? Of breast cancer. This risk is not death risk, it's a risk of breast cancer. Number 2, women with a family history of breast cancer who procured an abortion were found to have a risk increase of 80%. Teenagers with a family history of the disease who procured abortions before the age of 18 were found to have incalculably high risk. Why can't you calculate it? Because they only had 12 women in the study in that category. They all got breast cancer before age 45. So you can't even calculate a risk. It's 100%, but you know, someone might not get it, so you can't calculate the risk. This was not just one little study. In fact, this Darling study was a meta-study, so it included a lot of other research that had gone into this. And so it was not only their own research. And this was not recognized. So then, here comes 2003, Louise Brinton. It's become political, right? Oh, but we need to have abortions. So Louise Brinton of the National Cancer Institute, she convened a workshop. Oh, what name would you use for a workshop to ask questions? Would you call it the Abortion Breast Cancer Link Investigation Workshop? No, you don't say the A word. Remember, it was called the Workshop on Early Reproductive Events and Breast Cancer. Okay? The panel reported that the lack of an ABC link had been established. So, read that again. The lack of an ABC link has been established. So they said, we have found there's no link. Well, okay, April 2009, here's the Turkey study. Part of it was conducted in Ankara and part of it was conducted in Pittsburgh, in a top-level hospital in Pittsburgh. So it's both sides of the water. 66% increased breast cancer risk after abortion. So finally, here's the 2009 study, Darling, Brinton. There's Darling. She's the lady who did the study back in 1994 and 1996. Oh, here's Louise Brinton, co-author. The first thing they were looking at was the role of oral contraceptives. This is, by the way, this is kind of a moving target because some of the oral contraceptives over the last decades have changed, so it's just kind of hard to say. It's not like one thing, you can follow it through for decades. But they did say this. The study found a 320% TNBC risk increase for breast cancer over those who never used contraception. TNBC, triple negative breast cancer. That means the persons who have a negative for all three of the receptors that are used to treat breast cancer. But these authors didn't do a lot more work on just general breast cancer, not just the triple negative. But Louise Brinton signed onto this as a co-author, and it says, now for the abortion breast cancer link. It did not produce any new ABC link results, but it cited the Darling studies from 1994-96, showed that a 20 to 50% increase in breast cancer risk for women having abortions compared to those who carried their pregnancies to term. This citation is very significant because it contravenes the 2003 National Cancer Institute panel, and Louise Brinton is a co-author. So the cat's out of the bag. The camel's nose is in the tent. The denial maybe is coming to an end, but who's to know how it's going to wind down, because there are spin doctors all over the world. I don't know. It'd be good if there were medical doctors who weren't spin doctors. July 2009, Planned Parenthood and the Susan J. Komen for the Cure, they continue to say there's no abortion breast cancer link. September 2009, I'll read the small print for you, the China study. They even found a 17% increase breast cancer risk with induced abortions. And by the way, if we go back to the Turkey study, there's something very important to note there, which they found in other studies also, I didn't read. They found that while the induced abortion causes increased breast cancer risks, spontaneous abortion or miscarriage does not bring an increased breast cancer risk. So where we're going to go with all this, breast cancer is the greatest cancer killer among American women between ages of 20 and 59. Incidence of cancer climbed 40% in the last quarter of the 20th century since Roe versus Wade in 1973. Listen to this. While the incidence for all other cancers has either remained the same or declined. That's not a proof, but it's surely an indicator. So here's a little bit of a plot, okay? I found these numbers and I plotted them up. You can see on the left, 1975 to about 1980, the incidence of invasive breast cancer was fairly constant, 50 cases per 100,000 people. And then began this increase up to 1987, peaking out sometime in the late 1990s. And if you look at that, it's at the peak there, it's an 80% increase from 1979 to 1999 over the 1975 figure. Is that due to increased abortion? Well, I'll say this. It matches very, very well with the results of the Janet Darling study and what Louise Brinton finally admitted in this 2009 publication. So what's to say? Well, it's common for man to be filled with and driven by pride. But the Darwinian philosophy that tells us that we have come from random particles by random processes seems to force its adherence to the view that if chance got us this far, it's a no-brainer. We can improve things. It seems that this is a lack of trust and awe of God's natural order of things, and it leads man to engage in many activities which are harmful to us. For example, bypassing natural breastfeeding, undergoing abortions, oral contraceptives, unnaturally long delay to first pregnancy, by the way, also. I didn't mention that. When we understand that when God looked at the completed creation and declared it very good, those words had very precise meaning, which we only are now beginning to really appreciate in the scientific context. That's the Portland Zoo.